Queen Cities.
Awesome. So Cory, can you just introduce yourself a little bit? What is your role within the state with CGRS and everything? What do you oversee? What's your daily life like?
So my name is Cory Kahler. I've been with CGRS for 5 years. Currently, I'm the Wastewater Division Operations Manager. I have been pretty heavily involved in our RNG project as they've fallen in the wastewater realm, being at wastewater treatment plants. I've got about 8 years experience in CNG and alternative fuels for vehicle fueling in Colorado. CGRS works a lot with municipalities in the area, City of Fort Collins, City of Longmont, and we also do a lot of private CNG fueling retail stations in the state as well.
Awesome. So let's pretend I don't know a ton about RNG. Maybe I don't know a ton about RNG. Can you give me an RNG 101? Like, what are we talking about? How is it processed? How is it used? What can it be used for? What can it be used for? What's RNG 101?
So RNG, renewable natural gas, comes from a lot of various different sources. It's the stuff that we're working with currently comes from wastewater treatment plants and anaerobic digesters. It's just a byproduct of the breaking down of all the solids at the wastewater treatment plants. Produces pretty considerable amounts of methane, and they typically flared off because it is a bad greenhouse gas. So it's typically flared off, and there's just been a lot of advancement in cleaning up the methane and reusing it as renewable natural gas. It's RNG. I use it for vehicle fueling. Gets injected into pipelines of the gas providers and can be used across the country. Basically, it offsets the greenhouse gas, obviously, and we're using it, so it helps with carbon impact.
Yeah, it's my understanding that RNG can actually sometimes be carbon negative instead of just carbon neutral. Is that true?
Yeah, if you take into consideration the amount of carbon that's produced on a diesel burning vehicle and you eliminate that diesel burning vehicle and start burning renewable natural gas, it can be carbon negative.
That's pretty impressive.
It is.
So can you give a broad overview? You mentioned you worked with Boulder and Longmont on their RNG projects. What's going on there? What have they implemented? How has that developed over the last few years? When did it start? What's happening in Boulder and Longmont?
So we'll start with Longmont. Longmont was a pretty long process to get going. The city has economic goals, sustainability goals to meet, to be carbon neutral or carbon negative or lower their carbon footprint with a lot of their fleet vehicles. One of the vehicles that uses a lot of renewable natural gas is refuse fleet.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of starting and stopping, use a lot of diesel fuel, and they have this resource that's available to them at the wastewater treatment plant that just gets flared off unless they use it. And they came up with a plan to use the renewable natural gas in their refuse fleet, offset, their diesel gallon usage annually, and use the gas that otherwise would have just been flared off. So Longmont decided during the beginning stages of this project that they didn't want to inject into the pipeline. They actually wanted to utilize the fuel that they're producing at their wastewater treatment plant for their refuse trucks. I think it's a big community impact. It's a lot cleaner for the environment in the community, and it was supported by the community. So we went into the design phase with Carollo engineers, and we designed we actually built a building there for their refuse fleet. They got a brand new facility for their refuse fleet. They already had a maintenance facility built, so they didn't require any upgrades to work on the CNG or RNG vehicles, because when you start bringing these vehicles indoors, there's a lot of different code and stuff working on them. It's not like working on petroleum or liquid fuel vehicles. So we designed a CNG system for them where we take the renewable natural gas and we compress it, and then they put it directly into their vehicles, and it's supplemented by XL Energy pipeline gas.
Okay.
So it was a pretty interesting project. It took a long time for us to design it. There was a lot of, back and forth to utilize as much of the natural gas, of the renewable natural gas as they could. So they store a significant amount of natural gas on site in high pressure vessels. And then when they fuel their trucks, we pull out of those high pressure vessels, and that allows the continuing low flow from the wastewater treatment plant to be stored and utilized during the next fueling window. Mm-hmm. So that's been a very successful project. They are on their renewable natural gas now. They've been using that gas, I believe, for about 6 months now. So we've worked out some kinks and bugs, but it's been very successful for them. They're utilizing, I think they have 11 compressed natural gas trucks running on renewable natural gas at this point.
What percentage of their fleet is that? How many more do they have to go for their entire fleet to be renewable natural gas?
That would be a question for somebody at for John Gage, but I believe that they are. I think they're about 70% of their fleet. They're running 11 CNG trucks, and I think they've only got maybe 5 diesel trucks. I could be wrong on that, but I think their majority is CNG trucks. They did Regional Air Quality Council grants for their trucks, so they got a lot of help with their trucks, and they purchased 11 of them when they started with this project. In fact, they took delivery of some of their trucks prior to us completing this project. So they were ready for it.
Yeah. So you talked a lot about Longmont. What does the project in Boulder look like?
So it's a little bit different than Longmont. Boulder is not fueling any of their fleet vehicles with their renewable natural gas. They're actually injecting it into pipeline. And there was an agreement, I think the agreement's been finalized, that Western Disposal in Boulder, the big refuse fleet in Boulder, is actually purchasing all of that renewable natural gas. And they're going to be able to fill 33 of their trucks solely on the renewable natural gas that's produced in Boulder. So their system was a little bit simpler of a design. It only encompassed the wastewater treatment plant. There wasn't a high pressure compression aspect put into it.
Right.
But it's being utilized locally. It's from the gas that's produced from the Boulder Wastewater Treatment Plant, and it's being used in the community at Western Disposal, which is the primary disposal company in Boulder.
Wow, that's really impressive. So what advice would you give to other jurisdictions or other cities who are looking to implement a system like Longmont's or a system like Boulder's? What advice would you have determining which of those routes to go, whether you're putting it into the community or using it for your own jurisdiction? Starting off ground zero, what advice would you have for a jurisdiction looking to do something like this?
I think doing their research and figuring out what kind of load they have, whether they're going to be able to utilize all that gas. Right. Do they have a surplus of gas? I think that's one of the big things that what Longmont did doesn't necessarily work for every municipality. Longmont is able to use the majority of their gas. But if you have the capital investment up front to start capturing this gas and cleaning it to put in for vehicle fuels, you want to be able to utilize as much of that as you can, which in that case would suggest that they inject it into pipeline so that it can be used and they're not flaring off any of the good quality methane that's produced by this. Mm-hmm. I think it varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction on how they want to go about it. I mean, it's a lot more of a capital expense to inject into the pipeline. There's a lot more to it. The distribution companies with the gas, such as Excel Energy, they have very high expectations of the gas that you put into their pipeline. It's got to meet certain specifications, and it's a lot more expensive to do it that way. But the ROI can be much shorter duration if you're capturing all of the methane that's produced versus if you don't have somewhere to put it into trucks that are in your fleets. You're still flaring off some of that gas.
Right. So what were the circumstances in Longmont that allowed it to make sense for them to keep the biogas and the RNG local rather than putting it into the pipeline like in Boulder?
They're pre-planning and determining that their trucks that they were going to be using in their refuse fleet, in their solid waste division, were going to be able to use almost all of that gas. And long-term goals are to add more trucks to their fleet so that they're able to utilize all of that gas. So, different inflows at wastewater treatment plants will obviously impact the amount of gas that is actually produced at that plant. So if you have a really small plant, you may not be producing a ton of gas, versus obviously a large plant, you have more gas that you have to find something to do with.
Right. So I guess that is a perfect lead into my next question was, so can you convert any wastewater treatment plant to be suitable for RNG, or are there certain, you touched on the size of the plant as a consideration. What other considerations do you need to look at if you're thinking about turning a wastewater treatment plant into RNG?
The type of digestion that's at the plant. So it requires an anaerobic digester that captures the methane. And I know not all wastewater treatment plants have anaerobic digesters, but ones that have anaerobic digesters can support this type of application.
What's the process of getting an anaerobic digester for your wastewater treatment plant?
A lot of construction.
Okay.
It's an upgrade for a wastewater treatment to do anaerobic digestion.
Gotcha. What is the approval process like, considering permits and regulatory approval? Is there any EPA or NEPA that you have to go through to get these kinds of things approved? Is that a headache, or is that sort of built in?
There is. That question will probably be better answered by some of the different jurisdictions, such as Longmont stuff, but I'm familiar with some of it. There is some approval process. It's a lot of work with the EPA and DOLA grants if you're looking at getting help with some of this equipment and stuff. It is a process. There are resources out there that can help guide jurisdictions in the direction that they need to go to complete this. And it takes a long time. I think that, a couple years is not impractical to get this stuff going.
So aside from the environmental benefits, can you sort of break down what are the other benefits of implementing RNG into a jurisdiction? Obviously we talked about how it's carbon negative, but what's the return on investment like? What's it like for the community to take on this kind of project? Can you just break down some of the more detailed benefits of RNG for a community?
Yeah. So obviously a health impact, your environment overall. I keep using refuse or solid waste fleets as an example, but I think it's a great example when it comes to this. When you see a trash truck going up and down the road, picking up trash cans at every single house, every time that they step on the throttle on the old trash trucks, you would see black puffs of smoke coming out of the exhaust. It's dirty. It doesn't look. It's not appealing. I think one of the big benefits that I see, we have a lot of these communities are coming up with goals of sustainability goals, and there's certain things that they have to do to meet those sustainability goals, whether it's going electric with some of their vehicles, whether it's going RNG with some of their vehicles, but it just makes sense to take a gas that's already being produced that they have to find something to do with and utilize it somewhere else and then not use as much diesel. So it's a financial impact. The cost per gallon goes down pretty significantly when you start talking about not using diesel versus using RNG. Again, the sustainability stuff, I think that's huge with the communities. So there's a lot of different aspects of it.
So those are all really great benefits, but in the time of COVID and these really uncertain times, there's a lot going on. Budgets are being slashed everywhere. What would you say to a jurisdiction that is considering implementing RNG, but is hesitant because of uncertainties in budgets and, COVID and everything like that?
They're always going to have these vehicles that are going to be running on RNG or diesel. It's a known. return on investment is a long time, but really these projects are not meant to be short-term projects. They're long-term projects, long-term goals. The lifespan of them is long-term. So I don't think all of that stuff needs to be taken into consideration, but you can't look at it on the short term. You have to look at it long-term for future. Just because we have all of this stuff going, it doesn't mean that some of these sustainability goals and requirements that could be put on by EPA, state government, anything like that go away. They're, just because of everything that's happening right now. So, it takes a long time to get through the process. So, if it's something that's a consideration and they want to add this to their sustainability goals, then great.
So you mentioned that Longmont used the REQC grant. Do you know of any other grants or incentives that other cities have taken advantage of to make these projects possible?
DOLA, there's a couple of different grants that are available through DOLA, and then the REQC, obviously, for vehicles. I'm not as familiar with the grant process and stuff, but ones I do know of, they've been around a long time. DOLA's been giving grants for alternative fuel for a long time. So, but again, I know that there's a lot of help in these areas of if a jurisdiction is looking into it, they can reach out. I know, Northern Colorado Clean Cities is a great resource. We can be a resource to help out with some of this stuff. We're more on the construction end, permitting, design, more than we are the grant process. We don't, as of right now, we don't really offer having any grant help work with any of this. So.
Fair enough. So I just want to circle back. Right at the beginning, you said the first step would be for a city to do their research and to figure out if they, if they have the capacity to implement an RNG system. What would you say are the biggest considerations and best practices for gathering information in terms of, how do you discover if you have the right capacity? What things do you need to look at? What boxes do you need to check in order to make sure you have all the information to go to someone like CRGS to start this process?
I think one of the biggest things that I've seen with the projects that we worked on is communicate with your other jurisdictions in the area. Reach out to these wastewater treatment plants in these cities that have done these projects. We have multiple in Colorado, Grand Junction, Persigo Wastewater Treatment Plant. They've got one of these systems. Longmont, Boulder now. There's another one at South Platte. Reach out to these guys and talk to them and find out what the process has been like, what their experience has been like. We can only get better as we go. And I think that if you utilize somebody that's already gone through some of this, it will help tremendously. They'll really be able to provide accurate information and steps to go about this. Because I would imagine that, there's some jurisdictions, some plants that may be considering it, but they don't have the first clue of where to start. Right. And that's what it is. Reach out to somebody that's gone through it. I know that they're all very proud of their systems. It's exciting to all of them. They put a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of money into these systems, and they love to talk about them. They love to give advice on how to move forward with it.
Yeah. You mentioned that Longmont has had their system in place for 6 months now. Their vehicle's been running on the RNG for 6 months. Is that enough time to know for them to see the benefit of this system, or is it going to take 5 years, 10 years, 20 years for them to really have solid data on the benefit of this? What's that time frame like?
I think that time frame's probably a year better. I mean, they're seeing the benefits currently. They've reduced their fuel usage. There's a lot of air permitting quality stuff that they can work with because they're not running their flares or they're not flaring off the methane. I think that they see the benefits, maybe not in full capacity. There's still, you still work through when you put in new systems like this. They're very complex systems, and it takes a little while to work things out and get things figured out on how to run efficiently. So it takes a little while, but I do think that you would see the impact pretty quickly.
Great. I mean, that's encouraging. If jurisdictions are talking to each other and trying to get information from each other, that's good to know.
Absolutely.
So I guess I have one more solid question. What's the future? What's the future for RNG? What projects do you have coming up? What's new and exciting for RNG in the next 5-10 years?
Right now, we talk to a lot of different jurisdictions, municipalities that have interest in doing this. The CNG market in Colorado is a little bit slow right now, but there is a lot of these different entities are catching on. Waste management, they run a lot of CNG vehicles. I think they do a little bit of RNG in different areas, but really it's just getting it out there, and it's having some of the facilities that are currently in operation start showing the benefits.
Right.
Getting that news out there to say, hey, we can do this. It is a big environmental impact. It is helps meet sustainability goals. It's there's a lot going on, I guess.
Okay.
There's a lot going on. I mean, it's really big in a lot of other states. I would like to see a lot more of this come into Colorado. I think that we have more wastewater treatment plants in Colorado that are capable of doing these types of systems. Yeah. There's a lot of new stuff on the horizon too about doing it with landfill gas, because landfills produce them as well. There's a lot of talk with dairy processed gas. So it's out there. It's just getting it to catch on and really start driving these facilities to build them.
Yeah, absolutely. That's all I have. Julie, do you have any other questions? Or Cory, do you have any other closing comments?
I don't think so.
Yeah, not right off the bat, but it's a really exciting process, and we really appreciate you taking the time to talk about it. And we hope to see RNG grow.
Yeah, absolutely.
Specifically.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for your time, and I hope to hear from you soon.
Great. Thank you, guys.
Awesome.